Great to have you again for the next episode in our web series of the Tech Leads programming class. You can check out the previous video to get an introduction to what is going to happen here. Basically, we're trying to build a progressive web app and was part of the Tech Leads programming class at the Koforidua Technical University. Now, this section we're going to talk about authentication. I enter in my username, I add my password, and it locks me in, and I'm able to see any items I've probably added. This is with me. My name is Rexford, and my phone number is this. I save it, and it's there. How do we go about authentication on the server side? Now, okay, so let's move on and consider that. How do we go about authentication? Basically, we need to consider two sections of what is happening related to the authentication. Register and then login. Now, to register, here's what is happening. We want to ensure people do not hit our server and abusively and try to create their own write a script to actually simulate humans, making API requests to our endpoint, blah, blah, blah. So what we're basically doing is we're using a reCAPTCHA. You can take a look at what reCAPTCHA is, but it's basically what allows you to see this "I'm not a robot" thing when you're trying to use certain websites. Now, to get that working, we've set up our CAPTCHA and everything like that, and that allows us to enforce it. This section is basically saying if the CAPTCHA is successful and we have our CAPTCHA is right, if it's not a robot, and then we can go ahead and actually say yes, let's move on. So we make an API request to this URL, which, if it was a success, should give us this success field on our response object from Google. If that is a success, then it means we are doing something right. And so we go on to actually create our register the user. We check to see if all the items submitted are what we want. We move on to create the new user, hash the password. We don't store the actual user names in our database. That is really crude. You shouldn't do that. We hash it, and that is what we actually save in the database. If it's a username of that sort already exists, it's going to throw an error. As you can see here, user with this email address or username already exists. And you can see that in action. If we come here, we do that, we do this, and then I add in my password. Good. You can see from here, username with this email address already exists. And that is the logic we have here. We move on to create a verification token. That is what will be sent to the user's email for verification. And that is done by creating a random number, alphanumeric number, which is then saved into the database. You remember we have what we call the schema from our previous video. That fields, we have those fields available here, the verification token and the token expires. When we are doing the verification, then we're going to check it against that token to see if it exists. Then it means the user actually had an email, and that request came from this specific user's email address. That means the user has verified his account. That is the logic behind it. And so when that is saved to the user object, to the user collection, we can move on to say send the email verify with the verification token, and then the user will go and click on it. Now, the email will be sent from this. You can create your own your email configuration can follow this pattern. As in, I'm using Zoho Zoho. I don't know how to pronounce Zoho. And then the port, the secure, whatever requirements your email SMTP service requires. You satisfy that, and that will send the email using the public template we have here. Now, this is the template we have from here. This will be pulled out, and anywhere we have the link, as you can see from here, will be replaced with the configuration, front-end URL, and whatever verification token we have. We construct a link that the user can click on. So eventually you click on that link, and then it takes you to a front-end part which allows you to send that verification token back to the server for verification. And so if everything succeeds, we're able to send out a successful. If not, whatever block of section it gets to, the appropriate response is given. So we should be fine with the registering. The next section we're going to look at is the login. If the user wants to log in, we want to, this authentication file was taken from what is being used for Kofi.com, and so there's a lot of logic behind it that doesn't really apply to the Memfa application, but what applies to this part with the Memfa application is the login. And basically we take the username and the password or the email, whatever that the user sends in, we make it flexible. And so here we can say it should be an email or a password, whatever comes in, we can authenticate. With Memfa, it is simply it's also a username and password, whichever the user decides to use. We go into the database, we make an OR query, whether you find this or that. Therefore, it's going to be one of them, obviously. If the user sent in a username, it's going to be a username that will be found. If it was an email instead, it's going to be an email that will be found. Whichever one that is found, we are good to go. If none is found, that means the user doesn't exist, and then we should proceed to say user does not exist. So we compare the user's password using the compare password method. The compare password method is available here, and it basically takes the password that is on file, the hashed password that we had on file, and compares it to the password that was provided. And it is an internal method for bcrypt that allows us to do that. So I'm not going to worry much about explaining what goes into it. You can read more about it on their bcrypt package tutorials or documentations. And so if authentication failed, we send the appropriate response. If it succeeded, we send the appropriate response. If it was a success, we return the email has been verified. We send these details, that is the user with the token. We send this user object with this token along with it to our front end, and then our front end will have to handle it appropriately. We sign it with, we use JWT, which will basically sign it. A JWT, it's simply like this. Okay, I can't show you my JWT. I don't know the security implications, but I'm not going to show it to you. But then it's going to give us a string that is a really long string. We're going to find it here when you check your so now that I've logged in, I can just show you a bit of it, which is supposed to be at applications, local storage, and then here. So this should be my string. I'm not going to show you the entire string, But that's how it's going to look like eventually after login. And that is what the JWT string basically is. JSON Web Tokens. That's what it stands for. It's a token way of ensuring authentication by attaching the authorization or the JWT to each request that is sent to the server. With that, that is the basic part of authentication we are doing, login, register part, and then we have the verification, verify email, which takes the token that was sent to the email address, the one you clicked on, checks to find if it exists in the database, the user it exists on, we find, and then we change, we simply change the user to say the email verified field to say it is true. That means the user is verified, and then we are good to go and continue from there. That is it for authentication, and we move on to the next section, which talks about how our front-end aspect is also working. So thanks for joining me for this one, and hope to see you in the next one.